Okay, hi, this is Sue Phillips. I am the director of the science fiction literature track at DragonCon Goes Virtual. Welcome to everybody. Today we have our first reading. Jody Lynn Nye has agreed to join us and read us one of her fabulous stories. And I will let her introduce herself and her story and come back after she's done. Thank you.
Greetings. As she said, I'm Jody Lynn Nye. I write science fiction and fantasy, lots of it, short stories and novels. And this is my second humorous old westerns science fiction steampunk featuring my characters Trouble and her dauntless boyfriend, Duncan Rayburn. In the first story, which was called Trouble in an Hourglass, it was a time travel story that is featured in David Boop's Straight Outta Tombstone. And this one is going to be in Thrilling Adventure Yarns 2, edited by Robert Greenberger. And I'm very proud to introduce Trouble on the Rails. I sat in the aisle in the middle of the rumbling train car, sending glances of apology out to everybody sitting around us. Next to me, my lady friend Carrie Lynn Kuhn went on and on about what she could see out of the window, where we were going, and just about everything else that came on into her head, which was plenty. "There's a road that runs next to the rails," she exclaimed, pulling me by the arm so I could look out and see it. I went, not exactly because I wanted to exactly, but Carrie Lynn is mighty strong for a girl. I looked out at the dusty road and accompanied us over the sun-washed landscape. "I think it's been following us all the way from Center City. Aren't they clever to build it right here where it will be handy?" "I think it was their first trouble," I said, doing my best to extricate myself from her grip. I stood a good 6 inches taller than her, had weighed 40 pounds more than she did since I started shaving, and I wrangled horses, but I couldn't break free of it. The workers must have run it out here so they could work on the rails. She let go of me so abrupt that I fell back into my seat with a thump. "Well, you're right, Duncan Rayburn," she said. "What was I thinking?" I'm pretty sure everyone else in the train car had exactly the same thought in their mind. They all looked everywhere but the pretty girl in the voluminous ochre skirt and trim jacket with the tailored white shirtwaist underneath that showed off her tiny waist. I think that the big man in the severe black coat at the end of the car next to the sliding door wanted to laugh, but he kept himself under pretty tight control. I straightened my jacket where Trouble's fingers had made a mass of wrinkles of my lapel. I was wearing my best blue Sunday suit with a string tie and polished boots. Now I felt like I'd invaded a ladies' parlor in my cattle wrangling clothes. You'd never guess to look at Trouble's big, wide blue eyes and that mass of long golden hair piled up that inside that beautiful head was a mighty good brain. In fact, except for her daddy, Denton Kuhn, she was probably the smartest person I had ever met in my life. Smart didn't mean the same thing as wise, though. Neither of them had the common sense that God gave a day-old chick. Denton, who invented things that no one else had ever seen before, usually confined his investigations to the mysteries inside his laboratory. The Trouble was wide-ranging, hence her name. Her ma, Jo, who ran the local saloon, had come to me about a week before, worry on her face. "Denton's got to go to Denver," she said, wringing my hand with both of hers. She was darn nearly as strong as her daughter, so it made quite an impression on me. "He's finished that there secret device for the Department of the Interior, and they want it as soon as he can get it to them." "Shouldn't be no problem for him," I had said, working it out a little in my mind. "All he's got to do is load it on the train and find his seat. Once the conductor says that they reach Denver, he just has to remember to get off." "He can do all that," Jo had said. "The Trouble is determined to go with him." I knew what she was asking me and my heart sank, but I couldn't inflict trouble on the rest of the United States with a clear conscience. "I'll go," I promised. So there I was. I'd stood by as Denton Kuhn in his shirt sleeves, his fair hair all askew, oversaw the loading of his invention into the luggage car at the rear of the 6-car train. The secret device was so heavy that the car sank a little as the wheeled cart rolled up the ramp. It kind of looked like a Civil War Gatling gun with massive big cylindrical barrels mounted flat on it and electrical cables like thick ropes leading to a couple of massive planks made of metal behind it. Underneath the carness tarpaulin on the rear, you couldn't see any details, but it had something that looked like 2 big scoops on either fork of an enormous slingshot. Denton made sure to tell everyone not to touch those at all. It must have been something really dangerous because even Trouble wouldn't get near them. Maneuvering the device in the baggage car didn't go easy. A couple of chests in the forward corner were chained to a cleat in the floor with padlocks on them. The uniformed conductor was all apologetic about it, but he said he wasn't allowed to move them. The only way they could get the wagon in the car was for the barrel to face backward toward the caboose. Once it was loaded, Denton sat himself on a pull-down seat and folded his arms. He wasn't leaving his invention alone for a minute. Trouble and I went to had seats in the next car forward. Most of the other passengers in our car belonged to a group of some kind. Men and ladies alike all wore the same sober, gray-colored clothes in a cut that spoke of Sunday go-to-meeting. I wasn't particularly religious, but I showed up in church one time a week when I was expected to. But these people looked as if they went all the time and liked it. About every one of them had a leather-bound Bible, either in a handy pocket for impromptu prayers, or in a handbag or valise close by. The big man in black, who I thought that was their leader, had his good book right in his hand all the time. His leather-bound copy had the name Holy Bible stamped right in gold on the cover and the spine, which he turned so people passing by in the aisle could see, so they knew he was important. Once in a while, he stood up in the swaying car and addressed his flock. They bent their heads over the Bibles and murmured in unison over a page or two as he harumphed a syllable or so out loud, ended in a loud and echoing Amen. Once they'd been rendered suitably blessed for the minute, he sat down again. Except for that, trouble was the chief source of entertainment on the train. Those government fellas must have sent Daddy 20 telegrams asking about bringing the drill started to Denver, she said. They had a powerful hurry. He kept writing back to say the mineral refinement for the linear accelerator couldn't be rushed, but they just didn't want to hear it. He's done his best to oblige them, but what could Daddy do? Nothing, Miss Carrie Lynn, I said politely, trying to figure out how to get her to lower her voice. Exactly. So Daddy asked me to help him out with the projectiles instead. I got every one of them case hardened and sturdy and mounted in that magazine just as pretty as you please. They ought to be able to drive straight into the South Pass of the Continental Divide and blow a hole in it that can hold 8 men with pile drivers and pickaxes. There'll be a straight railway tunnel underneath it in just about no time. It's a lot more modern than the old way they've had to do it for years. Trouble's expression grew thoughtful. Daddy still hasn't been able to do anything at all about all that kickback. I think all they'll be able to do is brace it solid to take best advantage of that forward thrust. That's what I'd do. I guess so, I said. I never knew what she was talking about when she got onto the science she and her daddy did. Daddy wrote to the train company about having the baggage car empty to accommodate the accelerator, Trouble went on, occasionally meeting the eyes and smiling at people in the car who glanced up at her. They seemed powerful embarrassed to be eavesdropping, but they couldn't just help themselves. It's as heavy as a whole building, but they did manage to bolt it down so it can't move an inch. Lucky it fit in with all those valises. Then there's 2 heavy boxes chained to the floor. Wonder what's in those. It don't help to speculate, Miss Carrie Lynn, I pointed out. It's none of our business. Aren't you just a little curious? She asked, turning one of her winning expressions toward me. Those were pretty hard to resist, but when it came to right and wrong, I had to find the backbone. Well, I can be curious, I said. Don't mean I plan to indulge myself. Her big blue eyes widened, trying to draw me in. She sat up straighter and straighter as each new notion hit her. But it could be trade secrets, jewels from India, gold bullion from Sacramento. We're going to be pulling into Denver pretty soon. Isn't one of the mints right there? I waved a hand to drive away all her crazy ideas that were buzzing around my head like flies. If it was gold, there would be a dozen Pinkertons on board this train with us, I said, dropping my voice low. Well, it could be gold, Trouble insisted. That's about the heaviest mineral there is. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, one of the gray-clad women near us said, a stern expression on her wrinkled prune of a face. That's a sin. Trouble was only momentarily cowed. Oh, I don't want to keep it, ma'am. I only want to see it. Don't you think it would be a sight to behold, gleaming and pretty? I would not, the woman protested. Lying's a sin too, Trouble said, but so sweetly that the woman retired in confusion. Some murmuring erupted among the rest of the parishioners. Their leader decided now would be a good time to get up and preach at them some more. He almost collided with the conductor, who appeared through the sliding door at the end of the car, letting in the deafening clatter of the train on the tracks. The conductor checked all our tickets and let his gaze rest on each of our faces in turn. I didn't know better, I'd have said he was memorizing all of us. I had never been on a long train ride before, so all the little customs and tasks were new to me. As soon as the conductor left, a couple of burly men, one white and one black, both with their hair slicked back on top, wearing sharp white jackets and pressed black pants, rolled a rattling three-tiered cart into the car. Savory smells wafted from the two big platters covered with silver domes. A pile of plates and a cylinder full of cutlery sat beside stacked boxes of sandwiches, a bowl of cut-up fruit like a jumbled rainbow, and a tea-head server holding 3 whole pies. I had eaten a good breakfast, but that suddenly seemed a long time ago. May I buy you some lunch, Miss Carrie Lynn? I asked. Well, that would be downright generous of you, Duncan, she said in delight. We waited while the men served the preacher and the members of his flock. The servers pulled down little tables that looked like part of the wall and set small white tablecloths on them. They put real china plates down and served up whatever the diner asked for. The black man sliced ham off the bone with deft strikes of a wicked long knife. His companions scooped steaming, smooth whipped potatoes and chunks of carrot and deposited them next to the meat. My mouth watered. Trouble beamed at both men as they dished out her food and put a braided roll on the side of the plate with a pat of yellow butter on top. That looks delicious, she said. Y'all are so nice. What kind of fuel do you use to cook this all up? The two men looked at each other for a moment in bemusement. Wood-burning stove, ma'am, the white man said at last. Well, that takes a lot of refueling, Trouble declared, and aimed a thumb toward the rear door that led to the baggage car. You ought to talk to my daddy about his new fuel system. It's about 100,000 times more efficient than wood fire. You could cook for every single person in Kansas with it. They looked even more confused, which is the general way people reacted to meeting Trouble for the first time. I pulled her on her arm. Trouble? I don't think they need to hear about that. They've got people to serve. Thanks, gentlemen. I pulled my poke out of my pocket and put a couple of coins in the tray. They nodded their thanks to me and moved the cart down the aisle. I started to cut a piece of ham when I noticed Carrie Lynn staring hard at me. Abashed, I dropped my hands into my lap. I recalled that I should always let a lady begin first. Daddy told me not to let anyone disturb him, she said. Ma packed him a good lunch. I glanced behind me. I hadn't even thought about it, but there were no more passengers in the seats behind us in the baggage car. The porters were moving with some speed toward that rear door. I squeezed my way out from between the seat and the fixed table and moved to intercept them. Gentlemen, you don't need to go in there, I said, putting my back against the door. They both turned to smile at me. I didn't quite like those smiles, but I couldn't say why. The lady said her daddy is back there, the black man said, moving the cart forward a little. It hit me in the thighs. You might like some of this fine food. It's considerate of you, but he is provided for, I said, holding their gaze. Thank you, all the same. With some resentment on their faces, they turned the cart and rolled it all the way back and out the forward door. I made my way to join Trouble, who had already tucked into her meal. I couldn't resist the aroma any longer and set into mine. This fruit salad isn't as pretty to look at as it is to taste, Trouble said, having disposed handily of her main course and side dishes. She tapped the cut glass bowl with her spoon. I've got to tell Ma about this, only I don't think most of the men in the saloon would appreciate it. She glanced up. Look there, the waiters are shaking out tablecloths. Kind of strange they're doing it when they can get whipped right out of their hands. She pointed out of the window. I leaned over and peered in that direction. The black porter was shaking a length of white linen vigorously off the back of the car ahead of us. We were coming out of a low canyon where the train slowed as it strained up the gentle slope. We were heading for the foothills where the tracks turned from westbound to northbound on the way to Denver. I knew the details of our route from the small printed map I had in my breast pocket. From there, Denton would be accompanying the Army Corps of Engineers up to Casper, Wyoming, with his invention and start work on the mountainside. Once I escorted her on a tour of the big city, her ma hoped I could persuade Trouble to turn back and go home on the first train east. I heard a loud, grating squeal come from the front of the train. Everyone in the car looked in that direction. The car shook hard and swayed from side to side. Is it the apocalypse? A woman in gray asked, clutching her hands over her Bible. No, Miss Bridget, the preacher said with a gentle smile. The train is doing God's work, trying to fight against the demon gravity to deliver us safely to our destination. Gravity is God's work too, Trouble pointed out. Sir Isaac Newton wrote all about it, and he was a physicist and a theologian both. You ought to read his treatises. Yes, ma'am, the preacher replied, taken aback, but he reasserted his authoritative stance. May I? I pulled Trouble back. Let the man tend to his flock, I said. I hate to have anyone believe in a lie, she began, then stopped. We're nowhere near a town, are we? I fumbled for my map and unfolded it. Not for 40 miles, I said, following the lines of topography. That's where we'll be stopping for water. They say you can get a mighty fine view of Pike's Peak from there. Then where are those men coming from? She asked. What men? I looked up from my map. Them, Trouble said. I followed a pointed finger toward a rising cloud of dust a few miles away. A couple dozen men on horseback were galloping down the road that ran alongside the tracks, heading in our direction. I could just barely hear the sound of their hoofs hammering on the ground as they rode. I sprang up. Bandits! Where? Where? The other passengers demanded. I pointed. They sprang to the windows to look out. We've got to tell the conductor, Trouble said, pushing me out into the aisle. He's got a wire ahead to Denver. I scrambled to help her rise. Hurry! Under my feet, the train lurched forward. The engineer and fireman must have seen the approaching bandits and were trying to pour on steam. Locomotive moaned as though it didn't like the idea. The gray-clad flock let out a collective squawk and held tight to their chairs. We started to hitch our way forward. The door at the head of the coach slammed open. Nobody move! It was the white porter. He held a couple of mean Colt 45s leveled at us. All of you, drop your guns. Get back in your seat. Why, sir, the preacher said, rising up out of his seat like he was on springs, his face up under cloud. What is the meaning of all this? Sit down, the porter commanded. Stay where you are. No one gets hurt. He glared at me. Drop those hog legs on the floor. Do it. Careful now. I don't want no accidents. Gingerly, I picked my guns out of my belt and held them up with my thumbs and forefingers. I stooped slowly to the floor and set them down on the boards. The porter strode toward me. Back off, unless you want to meet your God right quick. The preacher flipped to the back of his Bible and withdrew from a hollow compartment a silver pistol a lot bigger and meaner looking than the porter's. He aimed it at the man in white, his voice calm and low. The Lord helps those who help themselves, son. I'm a U.S. Marshal. Now you drop your weapon and we'll just sit down quiet like. Ma'am, he addressed Trouble, whose eyes were as wide as saucers. You are going to wire the sheriff in Denver? I suggest you go do that right now. No, sir, said the black porter, heaving into view. He held a shotgun on us. The barrel was trembling. We were in more danger from him than the white porter because he was too nervous to aim right. A shot from him could go anywhere. Drop that, sir. I mean it. The preacher had no choice. He opened his hand and let the pistol fall to the floor. It bounced out of sight underneath the table. The black man moved up until his rifle barrel was in the middle of the preacher's back. His hands were shaking so much that I feared for anyone in the range of his gun. I couldn't figure out how the marshal stayed as calm as he did. The white porter doubled the menace in his voice. Everybody sit down and be quiet with your hands up. We're going to stop soon. Just pick up a couple of things, then everybody can be on their way. So it is gold in those chests, Trouble said. Behind her, the preacher's flock gasped. The white porter sneered. You're pretty smart, miss, but it won't do you no good. You won't get away with this, the marshal said. It's already done, the white porter said, an evil grin spreading over his face. Conductor's one of our men. 2 of them are in the engine compartment right now. You all cooperate, we'll be on our way with no one any worse off. The hammering of horses' hoofs grew louder as the sound of the train grew quieter. It was slowing down. The 2 men in white coats grinned at each other. The black man tilted his head toward Trouble. Her daddy's in the baggage car guarding something else valuable. Maybe we ought to take it too. You can't do that, Trouble declared in alarm. The fire in her eyes meant the men were in over their heads. They just didn't know it yet. You don't tell us what to do, miss, the white porter said, aiming one of his pistols at her heart. Go sit down now. I don't want to have to blow your pretty head off. Trouble backpedaled a mite. Leave her alone, I bellowed, shoving myself in between them. I reached for my sidearms, forgetting they were on the floor behind me. Something hot hit me hard upside the head, and I went down. I looked up to see the black porter aiming his shotgun right between my eyes. You get back, he said. His dark eyes looked as mean as anything I had ever seen. I eased up off the ground and stood with my hands in the air. The side of my head was on fire with pain. What Daddy has must be awful good. Let's go get it. He can't do nothing to 2 of us, and Brummel will be on board soon. Brummel? Louis Brummel? I blanched, even though it made the throbbing in my head worse. The wanted posters in the post office called him the master of the rails. He had a gang the size of a city, so they said. It took a lot of robberies to pay them all and keep Brummel in the style he liked to affect. Good idea, the white porter said. He gestured with his guns. Y'all come with us, too. You too, he ordered the marshal. No, cried a narrow-faced elderly woman in a lace cap. He's our preacher. You can't take him. Quiet down, ma'am, the white porter said with a glare. Go on, y'all, move. I can't, Trouble said. She started to sway to and fro, letting her head drop back. Her straw hat fell off her fancy hairdo and fluttered away. I think I'm going to faint. I'm swooning. I'm going down. The porters gawked at her, guns lowered. Trouble dropped backward into my arm with all the grace of an anvil. I caught her before she hit the floor, but she twisted in my grasp like a cat. Run for it, Duncan, she shouted, flinging herself to her feet. Help Daddy! The men gawked as she hurtled down the aisle toward the baggage car. I was a couple of steps behind her, trying to find my guns, when a bullet whistled over my head. It smacked into the wood paneling not 2 feet from me. Get down, Trouble, I yelled. She glanced over her shoulder, then ducked through the sliding door. I spotted one of my pistols underneath the feet of a bald-headed man in a 3-piece suit with a gold chain across his waistcoat and snatched it up. I made it to the back of the car like a greyhound and ducked through the door. You come back here, the white bandit boomed. Another bullet sang out, buried itself in a seat cushion. The other passenger screeched and ducked out of the way. Before the door closed between us, I saw the marshal battling with the black porter for his shotgun. The other porter was hammering down the aisle toward us. I yanked the second door open and hurtled through it, panting. Another bullet sang through the air and cracked the glass in the passenger car door. Trouble was on the other side, flailing at the handle. There's no lock on this door, she shouted. What's going on, Carrie Lynn? Denton Kuhn demanded. Duncan, you have blood on the side of your face. What's wrong? Trouble's daddy was on his feet. Like us, he had been enjoying his lunch. Napkin tucked into his collar. He had a roasted chicken leg in one hand and a bottle of beer in the other. Bandits, Daddy, Trouble said, out of breath. They're trying to rob the train. Those chests are full of gold. She pointed to the 2 strong boxes chained to the floor. Confound it, Denton said, his fair brows knitting together. I told the railroad not to stow anything else in here with my accelerator. The government was supposed to back me up. What is this nation coming to? They've got guns, Mr. Kuhn, I said urgently, trying to get him to focus on the real problem at hand. It's the Brummel gang. Their Confederates are in the engine compartment making the train stop. There's 24 men heading this way on horseback. We've got to get out of this place and go somewhere safe. I am not leaving my invention, Denton Kuhn said. It could mean our lives. Loud screeching punctuated my remark as the train continued to slow down on the upslope. Pretty soon it had come to a standstill, putting us all at the mercy of the Brummel gang. We couldn't have been going more than a few miles an hour. The baggage car didn't have windows, so I couldn't see out. The car was lit by oil lamps bolted to the walls and the shifting light from the windows and the doors at each end. Through the glass on the forward side, I saw the porter with the 6 guns had made it to the door. The bandit holstered one gun and tried to pull the baggage door open, but I smacked him over the wrist with my one remaining pistol. He let out a howl and bent over in pain. The door slammed shut. I wouldn't buy us much time. I looked around for a defensive position. All the valises, trunks, and bags belonging to the other passengers had been lined up according to which stop they were getting off at. I handed my gun to Trouble, who braced herself against her daddy's invention, facing the baggage compartment door. I pushed all the soft cases to one side and started heaping the trunks up against the door. Good idea, son, Denton said. He came over and hefted a trunk on top of the first row I had made. Stagger them like bricks. That'll make it harder to push over. I agreed. We built us a wall as fast as we could move. The bandit on the other side couldn't push the door inward by himself, but he wasn't alone. This won't hold them long, I said. The preacher's really a U.S. Marshal, but his flock is no earthly good. I hope he's got some fellow agents in the other cars. Another squawk of metal on metal erupted, but instead of being the sound of the train slowing down, it was beside us. Even though we were still moving, someone was trying to break in through the big sliding doors. The train must have slowed down enough that horses could keep up with it. It won't be long now, Denton Kuhn said, his face a grim mask. Confound it, we're all in danger if my invention gets into the hands of people who don't know what they're doing. We had the wall of trunks about chest high. Over the top of them, the bandit glared at me. He was still trying to fight his way in. I hoisted a big square red leather case up and blocked out the view of him. Trouble let out a yell. They're coming through, Duncan! The sliding door let out a massive creak of protest. The edge of a pry bar appeared in the crack and widened it. The metal catch holding it shut strained. I abandoned the valises and ran to the door. Fingers appeared around the edge. Outside, I heard rough voices shouting. "Bring up that ram," a man shouted. I brought up my boot and smashed the hands clinging to the edge. With a bellow, the owner yanked them out of the crack. I fumbled at the pry bar, trying to dislodge it. The metal nipped at my fingers, but I kept fighting with it. I thought I just about got it to where I could push it out of the door, when a big metal bar thrust through the space. It caught me in the chest. I stumbled and fell backward. "Duncan!" Trouble shouted. "I'm all right," I said. The metal strut started winching back and forth, widening the open space. "Mr. Q and you and Carolyn take shelter. Shoot if anyone gets through." I looked around for a weapon. We didn't have much. Trouble had my only gun. Denton hardly ever went armed. This was supposed to be a peaceable journey. An arm in a dust-colored shirt got in between the door and the jamb. I ran over to the far edge and threw my shoulder against it. I pushed it hard, but it was no use. Another arm in a blue shirt shoved inside, followed by a couple of extra hands. I strained to shut them out. Before I knew it, the owner of the dust-colored shirt, a bearded man with greasy brown hair, squeezed halfway in. Despite the jar and motion of the train and the door pinning him tight, he managed to draw a gun from the holster on his belt. He leveled it at me. "You just back away, son. I can't miss at this range." "Neither can I," Trouble declared. A deafening bang made my ears ring as she fired my pistol. A bullet pinged off the sliding door right next to the man's right ear. Trouble and her daddy were huddled behind the top covering Denton's invention. Just the top of her head and the barrel of the gun showed. "That was a warning. Now you get out and go away." "What in the Sam Hill?" When his head swiveled to look at her, I threw myself at him. I grabbed his wrist in both of my hands and wrestled for the gun. He was strong, but he didn't have the leverage to resist me. I got the pistol away and aimed it at him. He sneered. Unfortunately, moving like I did allowed his blue-shirted Confederate to pry the door the rest of the way open. The two of them, followed by a Pawnee Indian in a buckskin shirt with his hair clipped off his scalp, except for a crest on top of his head, leaped up into the baggage car straight at me. I fired, palming the cocking lever, but I missed with my first shot. Second later, the Indian was sitting on my chest, and the gun went spiraling out the door into the sun. He drew a long knife and held it to my throat. I struggled a little, but the sharp blade bit into my skin. "We don't want no heroes here," the greasy-haired man said, as he unlimbered the Colt on his other hip. I had no doubt I was looking at Brummel himself. His eye lit on the chest. "There's my beauties. Rogers, get those unfastened. Any of you got the key?" He kicked me in the side. I winced. "What about you?" "No, sir," I said, trying not to move my jaw too much. The banging on the other side of the wall of trunks attracted the attention of the leader. Rogers started pulling the cases down until the white-coated porter could burst inside. "We got everything under control in there, Mr. Brummel," he said. He held up a chain of brass keys. "There's a U.S. Marshal in there who's holding on to these. Carson is minding him right now." "Good man, Lewis," Brummel said. "Unlock the chests and let's get moving." Roger took the key and bent over the first chest. "Mr. Brummel, we got something else valuable, maybe," the porter said, pointing to the draped shape. "Maybe we'll take it along, too," Brummel said, perusing it with a grin. "The wagon will be along shortly." "That don't belong to you," Trouble said, popping up over the side of her daddy's invention. She had the gun fixed on him. "You just leave it alone." "You don't have a lot of leverage here, missy," Brummel said, almost amused, turning his weapons on her. "Drop it. Drop it now, right here." Reluctantly, Trouble let my gun fall to the floor. "What's it do?" The train screeched and swayed hard, making me slide almost all the way to the door. It had turned northward and was slowing down even more. Through the opening, I saw a dozen men on horseback pacing it up the slope, preparing to catch hold of the car. The Pawnee looked up too. When his head shifted, I kicked up and caught him in the wrist with my boot. The knife went flying. I bounced to my feet and made for Brummel. The Indian leaped for me, and I met his hurtling body square with my own. We wrestled together until a boom from a gun made us both jump. "Stop gallivanting around," Brummel ordered, with his pistol pointed at the ceiling. It now had a hole in it, letting in a pencil-thin beam of light. The Pawnee grabbed my right arm and hauled it up against my back. The train screeched some more, and another man jumped off his horse and into the baggage car. Most of them weren't far behind. "We're slowing down now. In a moment, we're going to stop. Y'all just act peaceable and let us take what we want. Move out and no one will get hurt. Understand?" I was pretty sure I didn't believe him. Brummel had a reputation as a stone-cold killer. If we slowed down, we were done for. Trouble, Denton Kuhn, and I all looked at each other. I saw a look in her eyes that I recognized with some alarm. "We understand, sir," I said with some haste. "We got it like a Bible truth. Right, Miss Carrie Lynn?" "Sure do," Trouble said, as sweet as pie. "You want to see what my daddy's invention does, Mr. Brummel?" "I'd like that," the train robber said. He fixed an indulgent eye on the pretty girl and completely misinterpreted the innocent expression on her face. But he didn't know her like I did. I braced myself. She had something up her sleeve. "Don't try nothing funny." "Of course not," Trouble said brightly. She swept the tarpaulin off the top of the invention. It looked like a children's toy cobbled together from pieces out of the hardware store, only on a huge scale. 4 big wheels with steel rims held up a solid wooden platform containing a couple of long steel rails that sloped upward between a forest of brass pistons to where the 2 arms of the slingshot held the half spheres of gray metal. On top of the long barrel rested a painted metal hopper that resembled the magazine of a Gatling gun, but was 50 times bigger. The whole thing had cloth-covered wires winding all over it like Granny's cat had got into a hank of knitting yarn. She laid her hands on a lever that stuck out one side of the framework. "Now, you know that Newton's second law says that force equals mass times acceleration, right?" "I guess so," Brummel said, looking bemused. Another of his henchmen climbed aboard, grinning like the devil. Rogers was just undoing the chain on the first chest of gold bullion. One more lock and they'd have it loose. Trouble beamed at him. "Well, this is my daddy's invention to drive a metal rod straight into a mountain so the Army Corps of Engineers can dig railroad tunnels. Those uranium hemispheres are capable of generating more than 500,000 pounds of force, which is enough to make the rod go at least 40 feet into solid stone, maybe more." Brummel tipped back his hat with the barrel of his pistol. His eyes had dollar signs behind them. "That sounds pretty impressive, ma'am." "Sure is. But do you know what happens when the source of the force isn't bolted down to anything?" "No. What?" "This." Trouble pulled the lever. With a clank, one of the big metal rods dropped out of the hopper on top of the device into the long slot on the barrel. The 2 gray hemispheres on the stalks flew toward each other like a child clapping his hands. When they met, lightning sprang out of them and ran crackling down the long rails. The whole contraption glowed red for a second, then a boom of thunder burst out. I sneezed on air that smelled hot and metallic like a thunderstorm. The world swept out from under my feet. Brummel, the Pawnee, and all of the rest of us fell over. And there was a giant, big, great, ragged hole at the rear of the car where the heavy rod had shot out of the back of the train like a giant bullet. The carriage hurtled forward, bouncing and creaking, leaving the horsemen outside far behind. They spurred, trying to catch up. I didn't miss my opportunity. I grabbed the Indian with one arm and rolled him toward the open hatch. His body hit the legs of the man who had just climbed on board. Both of them disappeared out the door. Then the train swayed and I almost went with him. "Hoo-hoo!" Trouble shouted, clinging to the lever. I could hear shouting and screaming coming from the train car ahead of us. The passengers had been caught off guard by the sudden surge of speed. I held on to the door frame, praying that I wouldn't be thrown out into the tracks. The train shimmied from side to side like it was as scared as the rest of us. "What the devil did you do?" Brummel demanded. He got up to his hands and knees, fumbling for his gun, braced himself against one of the gold chests, and put a bullet in the wall over Trouble's head. They both flinched down behind the accelerator. "Make this golden train stop!" They knew they couldn't. The moment we stopped, we were all dead. "This isn't going to last, Carrie Lynn," Denton Kuhn boomed at his daughter, hanging on to the frame of his device. "The acceleration won't be able to maintain the momentum going uphill." "How long's it gonna last?" she shrieked back. Denton, being Denton, he reached in the pocket of his coat and came up with a stub of pencil and an envelope. The train hit a bump and his calculating materials went flying. "Never mind that," I shouted, clinging to the door. The horsemen were now a couple 100 yards behind us and still falling back. "Keep it going." Trouble grabbed the lever and yanked it again. The 2 halves of the sphere separated, then clapped together again. Another pole dropped into the barrel and spewed out the hole in the wall. Boom! The train jerked a mite, then shot forward like it had a burr under its tail. The porter and the 2 bandits had lost their guns. Only Brummel was armed, so I figured it was a safe enough fight. I let go of my handhold and rolled toward him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw me coming and blasted away at me. A splinter jumped up out of the floor of the car into my cheek, but I didn't let that discomfort stop me. Trouble and her daddy were in danger. I pried myself up and sprang at him. Despite the unsteadiness of the train, we grappled together. He was older than me, 30 pounds lighter and a hand smaller. I got the gun out of his hand and threw it just anywhere. He squirmed like a snake. I gave him one punch in the gut, but he twisted and I hit his ribs instead. Help me, knock this fool down, Brummel coughed out. His henchman jumped in. One of them yanked my head back in its elbow and started pummeling me with the other. My face mashed against a stinking unwashed sleeve and I almost gagged. I refused to let go. As long as we were still moving, we were safe. I only hoped someone would report the runaway train and get the local sheriffs involved. The man holding me bellowed as his grip loosed suddenly. The cloth blocking my vision fell away. I saw Denton Kuhn swinging a lady's flowered cloth bag like the hammer of God. It must have had an anvil in it, because the man who'd been holding me was on the floor clutching his head. I couldn't pay too much attention because Brummel sank his teeth into my neck. I yelped and socked him hard in the kidneys. His face set in pain. He kicked out at me. The white porter put his shoulder down and charged at me. I twisted, but I found myself on the ground. Brummel and Lewis, the porter, sat on me. I kicked and thrashed, but the porter kept me down. I felt the train start to drop back. Outside, I could hear shots from the gunmen pursuing us. Trouble reached for the lever. Rogers came up from behind Denton Kuhn and put a gun to his head. The inventor held up his hands. Touch that and your daddy dies, the bandit said to Trouble. Drop it, a voice boomed from the door. U.S. Marshal. There, in front of the broken glass, stood the black-clad preacher, a pistol in one hand and his Bible in the other. All of us were shocked into immobility for a moment. Then Trouble leaped for the lever and hauled it again. Clap, bang, the train plunged forward. Disappointed shouts came from outside and got quieter and quieter as we sped away from the gang. The preacher jerked forward and caught himself before he fell. I twisted out from underneath the train robbers and sat on Brummel the same way he sat on me. The marshal came over and removed a pair of steel handcuffs out the back of his good book. He fastened them onto Brummel's wrists and hauled the man to his feet. The other two just held up their hands and surrendered. Denton hurried to embrace his daughter. The marshal turned to Trouble and doffed his hat. Miss, I thank you kindly for the assistance in thwarting this dastardly attempt at train robbery. I wondered what divine intervention had prevented the rest of the gang from getting on board. Then I recalled your edifying discourse on the device your daddy was escorting on this train. My flock is taking care of the other porter at the moment, although some of them might not ever get over the wild ride they just had. They think your invention is the work of the devil, sir. It's all just plain science, sir, Denton Kuhn said, looking mildly perturbed. I reckon it's a matter of perception, sir. The engineers are grateful for the distraction that enabled them to overcome the bandits that had joined them in the locomotive compartment, and they've wired ahead for help. I assure you that as soon as the Denver Sheriff's posse can round up the other robbers, that they will see justice as well. Denver? Trouble asked, her eyes bright. She clapped her hands with glee. We're coming into Denver? Well, the marshal said, laughter in his eyes, I believe with your last blast of whatever that was, that we have just passed through Denver at emulsifying speed, but sooner or later we're going to come to a stop. In fact, he said, glancing over his shoulder at the passing landscape, we're already about a mile north of the station. I don't think we're going to be able to stop for another 10 miles at least. Well, that's all right, Trouble said, reaching for the first of the fastenings, holding her daddy's invention down to the floor. If we wait until it stops, we turn the accelerator around, I can shoot it off again, and we'll be back up just exactly again where we're supposed to go. From the look on the marshal's face, he had the same picture in his head that I did of a hole that penetrated straight through the train all the way to the locomotive, and everyone's hair parted the cars in between. I came over and caught of her hands and looked into those big blue eyes. I think it will do just do it the old-fashioned way, Trouble, I said. I'm not sure anyone on the train is ready for any more of the modern method. Amen to that, the marshal said. So thank you for listening. This story is going to be appearing in Thrilling Adventure Yarns 2, edited by Bob Greenberg. And stay tuned, take a look at my website, and I'll post information about it when I have it. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jody. It was great. I had great fun listening to it. So
Thank you.
I can't wait to see it in print so I can get you to autograph it. But, so what else do you have coming up?
I have I have some more short stories coming up. I'm working on several things right now. I'm working on a book with Eric Flint for the 1632 universe.
Ooh.
I've got a fantasy series in brewing and quite a number of other things.
Good, good. So you're keeping busy in this time of
in this time of enforced.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know you're doing your, I'm sorry, I'm losing words, your
writer's workshop?
writer's workshop. Again, this virtually, of course.
That's right. I have 9 students this year. I've deliberately kept it small. We're
Yeah.
going to be working it on Zoom just as this recording is being done. Zoom is wonderful. It has kept me sane through this long enforced idleness.
It helps. It does help. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so
And
much.
I hope to see you again on our programming this year.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And thanks to
Okay.
everyone for watching. Bye-bye.